Hi and welcome to Data Garden. Thank you for checking out my video. In today's video we will be working in RStudio, and the goal of this video is to get an idea of the aggregate function in R. The aggregate function is one of the most important functions in R, and what it allows you to do is to create a function of the data that you're using, but grouping it by the categories in another column of the data frame. Now, if you think about it, this is pretty much what a pivot table in Excel does, where, for example, you have the categories of one column in your rows, and then you calculate the mean or the sum of another column of your original data in the columns of the pivot table. So what you can do with the aggregate function is pretty much the same as the pivot table function in Excel. Now let's get right into it. So let's create a new R script, and we will use two data sets of the integrated data sets for this tutorial, and those are iris and empty cars. So let's load these up first, and there we go. Now let's quickly look at let's start with the iris data set, and I'm sure you know it by now already, but I'm quickly going to display the column names here. Now, if we want to use the aggregate function for this data frame, we would obviously want to aggregate by the species. For example, we would want to calculate the mean of sepal length given the species of the plant in question. So how we would do this is the following. The command is called aggregate, like this. And then the first thing that we have to define is the column that we want to aggregate. So let's say in this case iris $sepal length, for example. And then the second thing we have to define is by what we want to aggregate. And there's a little specialty here in this command, because if we type just iris $species, it will not work, because by default the aggregate command, if you use it in this grammar, it will only take a list as the input for the categories. So we have to type around here list, and then the opening bracket, and then a second closing bracket here, like so, that you first define the column that you want to aggregate, and then as a list you define by which column you want to aggregate it. And then after you have closed the list command, you type another comma, and then you define the function, and for that you have to type in all capital letters FUN for function, and that equals, and then in quotation marks you have to type what you want to do. Now I will show you most of the functions that you can use, or many of them at least, but let's start with the mean. And let's run the command, and there you have it. The mean of the group, or the species Setosa, is 5.006. The mean of versicolor is 5.936, and the mean of Virginisa is 6.588. Now, there's another way to do what we have just done that is maybe a little bit more comfortable and a bit more elegant. So let's try this one. We type again aggregate, but this time instead of defining the x value and the y value separately, we can type it as a function. And how we do this is we type sepal.length, and then we type this this tilde sign, which, if you don't know where it is located on your keyboard, if you're using a Mac, you can use Option and the N key. And if you're on a Windows machine, it's with the Alt key, and I think it's on the plus sign. And then after that, we define the variable that gives us the categories, in this case, species. And then we type comma, and then in this case, we still have to define the data. So we type data equals iris, and then comma, function equals, and I'm going to use the mean again, just to demonstrate that it gives the same result, and press run. And now we see this one is a little bit better, because instead of giving us here group 1, it says species already, and it also, instead of here just saying X, it shows us that we're talking about sepal lengths here. And the values are of course the same, because it's just a different grammar for the same command. Now in the following, I want to show you some other functions that you can use with this aggregate command, and we're just going to copy and paste this line each time and enter something else for the function. So another one would be here, for example, when we type sum for the function definition, then we of course get the sum. We can also use the command sd for standard deviation, and we can use minimum and maximum. So let's try these out as well. And maximum. So now we have calculated a lot of descriptive statistics already for the sepal length of the iris data set. Now I guess there's one more that I want to show you, and that is quantile. So yeah, as you can see, this one gives us the 0%, 25%, 50%, and 75% and 100% quantiles for all the 3 species. And as you can see, with this function, you can do pretty much the same thing as you would with a pivot table in Excel. In this case, for example, let's look here at the maximum. You would define species as the rows, and then as the values, you would have here maximum of sepal lengths. Now there's one more thing that I want to show you that makes this aggregate function so practical, and that is you can also use categories of multiple columns or multiple variables for your grouping. And the iris dataset is not so practical for this. So for that one, I want to work with the empty cast dataset. So let's quickly have a look at the dataset actually. And in case you don't know it, it has some technical data of cars, which are pretty old by now, such as cylinder count, the horsepower, the time for a quarter mile in seconds, the number of gears, and a couple of others which I'm actually not sure about right now what they mean. Here's the miles per gallon. But let's say that we want to see the minimum quarter mile time given the cylinder count and the gear count. So how would we go about this? We would type aggregate, of course, and then what we want is the qsec, which is this column, and we want to have it as a group by CYL for cylinders plus gear, which is the second variable by which we want to group. And then we type comma, data equals empty cars, comma, function equals min. And there we go. As you can see, we have created one row for each combination of cylinder and gears that we have in the data set. And as you can see, there's an 8-cylinder car with 3 gears and an 8-cylinder car with 5 gears. And as you can see, the one with 5 gears, or at least the fastest one with 8 cylinders and 5 gears, is quite a bit faster than the one that also has 8 cylinders but only 3 gears. So one thing that we haven't covered yet is how you can get multiple values into one data set. For example, if you were using a pivot table, you could have it grouped here by the species, but then you would have, for example, the mean of the sepal length here in one column, and then the sum of the sepal width in another column, and then the count of the observations in the third column, just as an example. And you can do this with the merge or join functions, and we will cover these in the next tutorial. So if you have found this tutorial helpful, then I would be very happy if you gave it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content of this type, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions for further videos, then leave them down below in the comments. And thank you for watching, have a nice time, and bye bye.